Hi, today we will be discussing the Solutrean hypothesis, when it came into fruition, and what the hypothesis states. We will also cover its use by modern white supremacists, who cherry-pick information that can be easily misunderstood and manipulated to help their cause for hate and ultimately to justify their actions. The Solutreans were a Stone Age people in northern Spain and southern France. They lived in this region from 21,000 years ago through 17,000 years ago, and used a process of making stone tools and weapons called flint knapping. This is where river stones, antler tips, and even simple worked copper hammers are all used to fracture and flake a hard stone into a sharp tool or weapon. Everything from stone knives and arrowheads on up to spearheads and axes were made this way. How these stone tools and weapons are made is a combination of factors, from the material used, the intended uses for the tool and the game to be hunted with the weapons, and the physical realities and limitations of working with any sort of stone by hand. Thus, there arise commonalities in the stonework produced by Neolithic cultures around the world. But Dennis Stanford of the Smithsonian Institute and Bruce Bradley of the University of Exeter claim that there are undeniable similarities in the stone tools made by the Solutreans and those of the recognizably Clovis type found throughout North America. They argue that these shared features in the stonework are not a cause of convergent tool evolution, but rather proof that the Solutrean people managed to successfully migrate across the Atlantic Ocean during the end of the last ice age. They reached North America, Stanford and Bradley contend, and thrived well enough to spread their style of stone tool working throughout much of North America, producing what archaeologists now categorize as Clovis points. The Solutreans are believed to have crossed over from Western Europe over ice shelves that connected it to North America over the Atlantic Ocean. They were able to sustain themselves over this journey by hunting aquatic mammals and using their bones and herds of domestic animals to create Inuit-style clothing that helped them to cross the freezing ice pack. Due to more recent research in the biological field, biologists have found that much of the population of northeastern Native Americans carry a gene that is part of the haplogroup X2A. This same gene is found in the DNA of people of Western Europe and the Middle East, but also, most importantly, to the ancestral group of North Eurasians. This population migrated both to the east and to the west, intermingling and bringing haplogroup X2A into the Western Eurasian population, from which most Western European populations are descended from, and to the Eastern Eurasian population, from which groups later migrated across the Bering Land Bridge and brought copies of the haplogroup X2A along with them to North America. The Solutrean hypothesis is perhaps the single biggest foundation on which modern white supremacists base their claim of a white cultural continuity across prehistory. Their argument is that Solutreans were a white and characteristically Western European culture, and that there exists an unbroken connection between them and a Neolithic prehistoric people. This claimed connection and idea of a defined and shared racial identity shapes contemporary white supremacist thought. A great example is the struggle over the remains of the Kennewick Man, which is the skeletal remains of a Native American man dating from about 9,000 years ago. When the Kennewick Man was discovered in 1996, genetic testing had a long way to go before much anything conclusive could be determined, and therefore the origin and identity of the Kennewick Man was hotly debated. Most archaeologists agree that he was almost certainly highly related to the modern Native Americans of the Columbia River area in Washington, and in fact many tribes called for his remains to be returned to them for proper reburial under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. There were many people outraged, however, when the two archaeologists that discovered the Kennewick Man claimed that because of the shape of the skull and the age of the remains, that the Kennewick Man was not in fact Native American at all, and thus they could keep the remains for study. This controversy spanned courtrooms for 10 years, until in 2015 scientists at the University of Copenhagen were able to use modern advanced genetic testing to conclusively determine a strong ancestral connection to modern Native Americans in the region. James Chatters, one of the archaeologists that discovered the Kennewick Man, has since changed his stance on the identity of the remains, and now agrees with the data that proves that most ancient Paleo-Americans bear strong genetic relation and resemblance to modern Native Americans. This idea of cultural continuity across tens of thousands of years without writing and even spanning continents may sound ridiculous, but it forms the core of the rhetoric used by modern white supremacists. Groups like the alt-right Identity Europa use images of white marble statues of Adonis and Hercules on their stylish webpage to exemplify what they believe: that white Western Europeans are the pinnacle of humanity, and that most of humanity's greatest achievements are because of and based in white culture and identity. Identity Europa is a relatively new group, having been formed in 2016, and they jumped to use the Solutrean hypothesis to add credence to their stance and ideology. While they were quickly labeled a hate group by several prominent humanitarian watchdog foundations, they nonetheless have experienced a huge influx of members and are one of the leading contributors to the noted rapid growth of white nationalism in the past couple years. One of the main supports for the claim that the first Native Americans were genetically white is the common presence of haplogroup X2A among modern Native Americans living in the northeast United States. By intentionally overlooking the clear common ancestral origin of X2A in prehistoric northern Eurasians, white supremacists show a blatant disregard for scientific accuracy and integrity. By representing data as conclusive only where it supports their arguments, and working to overlook and avoid instances where it directly contradicts them, they are showing themselves to egregiously abuse genetic archaeology for their own benefit. The group of Solutreans, which according to the hypothesis could have crossed the Atlantic to settle in North America, are all depicted as being recognizably white in media, and oftentimes even distinctly medieval in skin color and appearance. However, the Solutrean hypothesis claims that the Solutreans migrated over between 21,000 years ago and 17,000 years ago. Through the study of many different genetic markers relating to skin color, eye color, hair color, and other factors of appearance, it has been conclusively found that what we consider European and white to be much more recently developed than the proposed dates of the potential Solutrean migration. Among European skeletal remains, there are clear indications that lighter skin, eye color, and hair color began visibly developing just over 5,000 years ago, a relatively recent occurrence. This is significant as it radically opposes the visual depictions and descriptions of white Europeans arriving first into North America and thus laying claim to it for the later white supremacists, who see themselves as culturally and physically contiguous and linked. The last way which modern white supremacists misuse science and archaeology to support their narrative is in a deliberate misunderstanding of the techniques and realities of stone shaping for tool creation, called flint knapping. Flint knapping utilizes hard granite hammerstones to impact and fracture flint or obsidian into workable pieces. Then, antler or early primitive shaped copper hammers and points were used to pressure flake the perimeter of the stone to create a sharp, serrated, fine edge. All edge tools are advanced stone tool work than others. What the modern white supremacists don't acknowledge is that at the time of the hypothetical Solutrean migration across the Atlantic, most of Africa was actually producing far better stone tools than most of Europe. However, the crucial detail regarding advanced stone tool work, which white supremacists deliberately misrepresent, is that there is a marked design convergence independently arrived at between the Solutrean tools and those of the Clovis point style developed in North America. Both achieve a very thin cross-section, for arrowheads and spearheads especially, by a process called fluting, wherein a pressure flaking tool is pushed hard towards the center of the stone piece being worked, and a long deep flute is broken off. These create the deep valley and peak serration style seen both on Clovis points and on actual historical Solutrean points, and decrease weight without sacrificing structural integrity. This convergence in design is not because a concept must be communicated directly to have a presence elsewhere in the world. The concept of individual invention is known and understood in archaeology, where different unconnected cultures produce similar or even identical items. A great example of this is the bow, which was independently invented on most continents except Antarctica. Like the bow, the deeply fluted and pressure-flaked arrowheads of the Solutreans, as well as the Clovis points, are most likely examples of convergent design. Tool advances probably independently invented to tackle similar challenges and obstacles with similar material to work with.